Welcome to Project 1. For this project, you will be making a zine. Zine is short for magazine or fanzine, but in principle, these publications are very different from the magazines you're generally familiar with. Zines are usually handmade in small batches or reproduced for short supply circulation via photocopier, risograph machine, printer, or other amateur press mediums. The formats are usually small and handheld for this reason. Zine content can be original or appropriated and curated around a central narrative. Historically speaking, zines focused on the dissemination of countercultural or subcultural ideas, especially in the 1970s and 80s, when they were popularly used to promote offbeat or controversial music groups. In keeping with their non-mainstream content, zines developed a unique aesthetic typified with bold composition styles and elements. Groups such as Printed Matter Incorporated and Drawdown Books promote works reminiscent of this visual language. Each year, Printed Matter also sponsors the New York Artist Book Fair, one of the largest ongoing exhibitions of zine material. Zines continue to break from traditional magazine agendas, but audiences of today would be better described as niche or specialized rather than deviant. Artists can use zines as post-interview leave-behinds for potential employers and as mini portfolio examples to showcase their unique artist style and cultural interests. In this tutorial, I will first go over some new tools and techniques which you should recognize as being implemented in the example provided for this project. After going over these steps, I will also provide some step-by-step instruction on how you can begin building content for your own zine, and ultimately, how you can coordinate this content into a finalized portfolio piece. Now that you've had a couple exercises worth of practice with the pen tool and know how to use it effectively, I'm going to show you a trick that will teach you how to convert a hand-drawn illustration into vectors in Illustrator. When I drew this image of the chair, I was using a black felt pen and a ruler. I tried to make my lines as clear and crisp and straight as possible because that's the sort of illustration that will work best with this technique that I'm going to show you. I've opened this image in Illustrator, and if you click on the image, you'll notice that your top menu bar will change if you're working in Essentials Classic. An image trace button will appear. If you click on this button, there are a few different views that you can see. What it's showing right now is the tracing result. You can also see the tracing result with outlines, etc. You can just leave it on tracing result, but you want to hit this box to the left, which is the image trace panel. The reason that you want to open the image trace panel is because you can adjust the threshold to be less or more. And if you study the image, as I toggle this little dot, you'll notice that there's more and less detail showing. Depending on what the image is that you're drawing and the effect that you're trying to get, you may want a higher or lower threshold. Also within the image trace panel, you have certain presets that are designed for different types of drawing. So an architect might use a different preset to convert his blueprint drawing to vectors than an artist would who is trying to convert a graphic sketch to vectors. So a few of these will produce highly different results, and they will also change the threshold adjustments to match what the program considers the best threshold for that particular preset. You can just leave it on default and then adjust the threshold manually so that you can have the most optimal outcome and have the most control over what you're going to end up with. Once you have the threshold where you want, you can go back up to the top and click Expand. Now, when it's created these vectors, it's created them for not only the positive space, the black chair in this case, but also for the negative space, the white background. I don't need the vectors for the background, so I want to get rid of them. I can go ahead and double click on that square and hit delete, and that'll go away. There will still be vectors in the individual negative spaces of the drawing, however, so something that can be helpful is to simply draw a square and make it in a different color. That way, when you put it to the back of the image, you'll be able to see very clearly where those other white spaces are, just like that. So then I can go through and I can just delete these one by one, or if you're using a Mac, you can use the Shift key and continue going through and selecting these, and that will enable you to select a bunch of them at once and delete them at once without having to continually go through and press the delete tool. Got a couple more in these little balls here, and I'm done. Now, this is a really great tool if you're trying to work quickly, but if you highlight the paths, you can see that they're not perfect and that there are a lot more anchor points than you would probably create if you were drawing this yourself. So if you're dealing with a detailed drawing, this isn't really a good method to use. But if you're dealing with a very simple, clean drawing, it's a lot faster sometimes to just do the sketch by hand, photograph or scan it, put it into the program, and then convert it to vectors in that way. Now, you can always go back in and change the paths of these vectors, just like you would if it was a drawing that you created on your own in Illustrator. Let me show you. If you have the pen tool selected and you right-click it and you go down to the Delete Anchor Point tool or the Add Anchor Point tool if you want to add new anchor points in, but I want to get rid of some right now. And I have my path selected, I can just go right in and say, I don't need that anchor point, so I'm going to delete it, and I don't need that one. And that way you can get rid of some of the excess anchor points that it will automatically create if maybe you don't have a super clean point in your drawing. And that is how you can convert a hand-drawn illustration into vectors using Illustrator. Let's say you're working in Illustrator and you want to bring a drawing onto this yellow rectangle, but you don't want that drawing file to have a rectangle of its own. In this Photoshop file, you see a drawing of a chair that I've done, but it has a white rectangle. If I tried to copy this content and take it over to Illustrator, it would bring the drawing in with the white rectangle and it would block the yellow rectangle beneath it, which is not what I want. Now, there are a few ways that you can avoid this. One way is to, while you're within Illustrator, convert that drawing into vectors and simply delete the vectors for the white background. But there are also some ways within Photoshop that you can manipulate the drawing to have a transparent background. If we were trying to complete this task solely within Photoshop, you could always copy the content, paste it into a new layer, and change the blending mode, as I have, to darken. That would immediately get rid of the white background that would show in the normal blending mode. But using vector objects like shapes in Photoshop is not ideal, as we've discussed in the past. So let me just show you what to do with the chair drawing so that it can have a transparent background. Within Photoshop, you have a few different ways that you can select things. We've been over the rectangular marquee tool and the lasso tool already in previous tutorials. There's also the magic wand tool, however, and the magic wand tool works by selecting an area, and the magic wand tool will then extend its selection all the way up until it hits a border or a parameter. In this case, if I select the white background, it's going to select everything all the way up to that line drawing. It won't select what's inside the lines of that drawing, but it will select all of the background. So if I unlock this layer, get a new layer, which will automatically be transparent, and then return to my chair layer and hit delete, then you will see that everything that it had selected is now transparent. So if I wanted to go into those areas, I could still use the magic wand tool, and if you're using a Mac keyboard, you can hold down the shift key and you'll notice that a little plus sign will appear next to your magic wand tool. That just means that you're adding to your magic wand selections, and it's an easy way to just go through, select all of those white areas, and then hit delete in one fell swoop. Now I'm going to deselect everything by hitting Command D, and I'm going to Command Z some of those things that I just did, so undo them, so you can see another way of going about this. Within your Select menu panel, you have a Color Range selection option. This will open your Color Range menu, and an eyedropper tool will replace your cursor. Wherever I click with this eyedropper tool, that will select everywhere in the composition that consists of that color. So if I select white, then everything in the composition that's white will be selected. Now it doesn't look any different over here in the little thumbnail because it's showing the selected area as being white. So if I select the black chair instead, that will immediately convert to white. If you have just image selected, it'll look exactly like your composition, but the selection is a better thumbnail to use because it shows you what you're doing. You also have the option of fuzziness, which is basically dealing with the threshold, and you'll see that the image basically disappears when I pull the fuzziness way down because it's not as high of a threshold. If you want to get more of the visual data that has to do with the color that you're trying to select, increase the fussiness. So I'm trying to select everything that's white, so I'll make sure I'll hit that with the dropper tool one more time, hit OK, and then you'll see the ants crawling around, and they're also crawling around within the lines. So that's a really easy way to really quickly select the white, and then you can just hit delete, and because we have layer 1 with a transparent background, everything will automatically be transparent. Now, I could select my inverse at this point with my chair layer selected. I can then copy that, jump back over to Illustrator, and paste it. And that will paste in as a rasterized chair. If, however, I want to save this file so that I can place it multiple times in multiple files in the future, you need to save it in a very specific way. I can go ahead and delete layer 1 since I don't need that anymore, and I'm going to deselect everything. I need to hit File, Save As, and the particular format that you need to save this as is a PNG. PNG means that it will be saving it with a transparent background. So I'll type in chair, hit save, and hit OK. Then, if I run back over to Illustrator and I hit Place, File, Place, find my chair PNG, click somewhere, it will put it inside a bounding box, and as you can see, there is a transparent background there. So those are the ways that you can bring in an image with a transparent background into Illustrator. To create a new file for your zine, open InDesign and open the New Document window. The document should be 24 inches in width by 7.917 inches in height. Make sure that Facing Pages is not selected and your start number page is 1. Click Enter and you will see a page which looks like how your zine will appear when it is completely unfolded. Now open your Pages panel, and in your master pages, go ahead and make a vertical line. You're prompted to make 3 such vertical lines so that you can see where the pages are going to fall in your magazine. Give them a light 0.25 point stroke, and you can align them at their baseline or at their top line. You are given the coordinates for where these lines should fall. So on the X coordinate, the first one is meant to be at 5.6 inches, the second is meant to be at 11.2 inches, and the third is meant to be at 16.8 inches. Now I can see where each of the 4 pieces of paper will be on my zine when those 3 folds are made on the final product. I've created them on the master page so that they will automatically appear on any pages that I create within the document. So when I make the second page to make the back of my magazine, those lines will also be there, and it will be easy to go back and delete them from the master page when I'm done creating my document if I don't need them anymore. Now you can fill this zine in any way that you want. You have to fill it with 3 out of 4 types of content: photography, handmade illustration, vector illustration, and text. I'm not going to build mine from scratch because the particulars of how you will build your zine is going to be different for each of you. I will, however, show you what I ultimately made. This is my zine, and as you can see, I've used different elements in my design so that I can easily see where my page breaks are. On the far left, I can see because the edge of this photograph goes up to the page, and over here, I can see where that opacity shifts between this white box and then the shape behind it, the darker green. Over here on the second page, however, it's much more difficult. There's no clear line about where one page begins and where one page ends. The reason I bring this to your attention is because the directions tell you that once you're done designing, you're going to export these as JPEGs and then reinsert them into individual pages in InDesign. Now you're reinserting them into a rectangular frame tool. So really what's happening is that the content within each of those rectangular frame tools has the entire spread. You can see that brown box extending far beyond, and over here it's basically the same content, it's just shifted one page over. Same thing here, you just see that content shifting all the way over. If you create your zine in such a way that you can't tell where one page begins and one page ends, you get to an area when you can't tell, and then you try to export these individual pages, if they need to line up in a particular way, but it's been hard for you to distinguish where one begins, where one ends, then that could be a problem. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say that this chair is designed to go into the next page like so, but I don't know exactly where it is when I'm pasting it in. Maybe it's right here, or maybe it's a couple millimeters over. And then when I go to the next page, I would have to line it up perfectly so that that chair rail lines up with this chair rail, and I don't really know exactly where that is. That will be an issue for you once you go forward to your mock-up, and you have to line everything up by simply placing these individual pages in, which you'll see in a minute. You'll see how that works. But I'm just telling you all of this ahead of time so that when you're designing, you kind of have the foresight to know this is what you're going to have to do, and these are the problems that you might run into, so you can design in such a way that you don't have to deal with those problems. Okay, so this was my design. Again, I can see my individual pages here, and over here, since I don't have content that's actually overlapping into the other pages, it's not a problem. And when I made my individual pages, it was very clear to me where each of these different pages are supposed to end and begin. I can simply use the photograph over here, take it all the way to the edge, and as long as it is no longer seen, I know I'm exactly where I need to be. And then down here at the bottom, as long as my chairs are centered and they look good, the background content is one color, so it's not going to be a problem whatsoever. So once I was done pasting in these images into their rectangular frame tools and situating the content in those rectangular frame tools, I was then able to re-export this document as JPEGs. So I'm just going to remind you how to do that. It's the same thing that you're going to need to do initially when you have your spreads so that you can have these JPEGs to place into the rectangular frame tools. But the process is fairly simple. We've done it before, but if I were just to show you, you need to hit File, Export, and you find a place in your document files where you want to place these. Hit Save, and then a new Export JPEG window is going to pop up. You need to ensure that all is selected and that pages are selected. It doesn't matter what's in this range box as long as range is not selected. You need to ensure that all is selected. And then once you do that, it'll create individual JPEGs for each of your different pages. So in this example, it's going to create 8, and over here in the previous example, it's just going to create 2 JPEGs. But you need to ensure that all is selected so that it'll create an individual JPEG for all of those different pages. Resolution should be 600, that's good. Definitely nothing short of 300, and color space can be RGB or CMYK, whatever you've been designing in. It'll probably just prompt you with the default that your document is set to, and then you can hit Export. Now at this point, you would need to insert your content into your Photoshop mockup. So this is the Photoshop file, the 4-fold brochure mockup, and this is actually extremely simple. All you have to do is go over here to your layers panel, and there's a folder already created that says your design. You need to expand that folder. The instructions tell you that you need to right-click on one of these layers and then hit Edit Contents. Make sure when you're right-clicking that you right-click over the title of the layer. If you right-click over the thumbnail, it's going to give you a different menu prompt than if you right-click over the layer name. You need to scroll down within this menu that pops up and hit Edit Contents. What that's going to do is take that individual layer that you selected, which is this particular panel of the brochure in this case, and it's going to open it in a new tab in Photoshop. Now all you need to do at this point is just paste your photo in. When you're in Photoshop, the easiest way to do this is to hit File and then hit Place Embedded. That's going to open a window that'll let you select a file from your computer. So find the particular exported JPEG that would associate with that page in the mockup. You can always go back over the other tab and say, okay, which one is the far left and am I dealing with the front or back? Make sure you've selected the right page. Hit enter, and once you have this content, you can always go back to this layer 0 and delete that content if you don't want it anymore. And you need to hit File, Save. It's very important. If you don't hit File, Save, this content will not transfer back to the brochure. So you hit File, Save, you hit OK, and then when we go back, we'll see, give it a little bit of time, boom. Immediately pops up into the brochure. You don't need to worry about the technicalities of what's going on behind all of that, behind the curtain, if you will. But all you have to do is follow those steps for each of these other pages, for page 2, page 3, page 4. And then you save this Photoshop file, and that is how you create your Photoshop mockup. Now, just to show you what it looks like when it's completely done, this is my mock-up of the front of my zine. Very similar to my InDesign file, but obviously in this mock-up version, it looks as if it is a piece of paper that was printed. And then we can go over to my mock-up 2, and that's the other side. Again, just to remind you about how to design and how to avoid problems. Note that the content does not overlap in these pages at all in a way that these objects need to line up. And when it did overlap, as it does right here on this seam, I knew exactly where to place the image of that document because of how it was designed and where that clear boundary mark is. So that is why it's important. When you get to the mock-up stage, your content is not going to line up perfectly if you have not done it correctly. In order to avoid that headache, just follow what I said before. Make clear to yourself in your design where your pages begin or end, or make it so that your content is isolated to the center and that the background is seamless so that you don't have any alignment issues. Now, it's very satisfying, I will say, to see the mock-up version. Some of these mock-ups can be a little hinky. This particular one works really well, and it's great for platforms like the website that y'all are building. And it's a great tool to know how to use these mock-ups because let's say you're making a brochure for a show that you're having. You can make it in the mock-up, send it to the printer, and they know exactly how you want your pamphlet to look. Just one example, but many different uses for these sorts of mock-ups. You can find them online, download them, some for free, some you pay for. This one obviously has been provided to you through the class, but really great resources. Great to reach this point in the project when you finally see your mock-up coming together and your zine take on that three-dimensional quality. Congratulations for finishing project 1. A lot of steps to this, but this is a really great project to have in your portfolio and a great number of skills for you to have going forward. So congratulations on reaching the end of project 1.